What's up, gorgeous? I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to another episode of the Fierce Framework, where we talk about becoming fierce through messy action, baby steps, and cultivating your confidence. I'm your host, Mary Beth. I'm an ADHD kid with a dream to see more women living lives that we're excited about. I want to see us breaking out of the mold society tells us we're supposed to fit into and start living life more on our own terms, where we're in line with our values, we're pursuing our purpose, and we're making our dreams turn into realities. If that sounds good to you, I think you're going to love this episode because today we're talking about taking a step back so that you can go even further in the future. Last episode, we talked about celebrating and how powerful it is to pause before you dive into your next goal. And sometimes you have to pause, and sometimes you even have to take a step back. So, this can be like a sticky subject, and I definitely want you, like, if you feel like this is kind of aimed for you or a topic that you're kind of wrestling with right now, I want you to be especially careful, like, sifting through whatever you're hearing me say and making sure that like it actually applies to your situation because I think this type of thing can be so easy to misconstrue and I think that that's part of why we don't necessarily talk about it a lot because there's this tension between doing the thing and starting before you're ready and taking messy action instead of waiting for perfection. And if you've been around for any time at all, like you know I'm all about those things. So I like want to be so careful talking about this, taking a step back, like pausing because it can be so easy, especially if you're like me and you're kind of lean towards inaction anyway. I realize that I lean towards inaction based on like perfectionist tendencies, right? Like I feel like everything needs to be perfect before I put it out there, or whatever I'm working on like isn't good enough, and so I'm like waiting for it to be better or to have a better idea or a way to, I might even have like the project sitting right there, right? But I'm like waiting for to learn more about it or to come up with a new idea to like make it even better because like nothing's good enough because perfection doesn't really exist, right? So when you're aiming for perfect, there's not a realistic standard. Like it's literally not realistic. It's perfect. So it's never get like nothing ever gets to that point, right? Depending on like your definition of perfect. But typically, right, that's kind of the whole point of perfectionism is like you never actually get there because nothing's ever good enough because perfect doesn't like really exist in real life. So I understand like my own tendency to lean towards inaction because of perfectionism and then also just like fear of fear, which perfectionism also ties into that. But it's like fear of being judged. So whether that's like if what if people think like who does she think she is or um what if they think that what I'm putting out isn't good enough? Or what if I'm misunderstood and I'm saying something with good intentions and it comes across wrong, or somebody wants to like misconstrue it and, pick it apart and start a fight or like whatever. Um, or, and then you bring in like fear of success too, right? Like what if my project like turns out really good and then people are looking at me like, okay, what's the next thing? Or then expecting me to be like a certain way or do certain things or behave a certain way because I'm just like a successful person or whatever all of a sudden, right? So there's so many reasons that we lean towards inaction, and that is why I focus so much on the action because my people, right? If you're anything like me, you already lean towards that inaction. And so usually like what we need the encouragement for is to take that action and is to move forward even before we feel ready because otherwise like our tendency is going to be to wait and wait and wait forever and like never actually take that step. So I want to be clear that I am absolutely not pushing you towards inaction with this messaging and like with what I'm trying to say today. But I do want to talk about how sometimes like Like last time we talked about the pause and how that's important, and like you take that time to kind of gain perspective and look back and gather data and information so that then you turn and look forward and you have more like tools and resources from the data that you gathered looking back on where you came, right? And so pausing, absolutely powerful. But that's pausing, right? I'm not encouraging anybody to stop. Um, and then taking a step back. So I feel like this is like a really sticky topic, but I do think that from my perspective, I can actually get caught up, right? They've once I realize this about myself that I lean towards inaction and if I don't kind of push through that and take action anyway and be willing to be messy and understand that like it doesn't have to be perfect and good enough is good enough or we're putting it out there. Anytime that's a bold statement. Um, okay, just gonna finish the thought anyway and just give me grace. I feel like anytime we're kind of pushing towards something that we don't fully believe, um, there's a huge opportunity for like this forcedness because there's a lack of authenticity because you're not there yet. Like you're not embodying, you haven't become that person yet. You're striving to become that person. And so I think this is part of why, like, when we're learning boundaries, they can come off as super harsh because we don't really, we're still learning to respect our own boundary, right? So then it's kind of forced, and you're trying to force other people to respect a boundary that you're still working on believing in. Or confidence, right? If you want to appear self-confident and you want to appear like you really believe in something, sometimes that can come off as arrogant or that you're like forcing it or trying to convince people that you believe in yourself because you're trying to convince yourself, right? So when you're in that like learning, becoming, working towards, or maybe like faking it till you make it, right? There is that disconnect because it's not authentic. That may be the person you're becoming. It may be the person you want to be, and maybe you're striving to embody that person, but it's not like fully integrated yet. And so there is a little bit of a disconnect. And I think that like sometimes people can pick up on that, right? And sometimes it's more extreme than other times, right? Because it's a journey. So if you're at the very beginning of your journey, the disconnect is bigger, right? And then you become because becoming is like a oh man, my lack of grammar is going to show up. But it's like an action, right? It's a journey. It covers time. It's not one and done. It's not immediate. So as you're becoming, you're going through this journey and you're getting closer and closer and closer. And then, right, you become that person and you integrate those new characteristics. And then eventually you are that person, right? You're confident in this area or you're confident in yourself. Or you believe in your boundaries and you respect your boundaries. And then once you're integrated, I feel like it's because then it's authentic. It is who you are. I do feel like that expression to the world is a lot more natural and like easeful. And I do believe that it kind of communicates externally a lot better, smoother than when we're still working to become that thing. Hopefully that wasn't too like conceptual and I don't know, intellectualized. It makes sense in my head. If it doesn't, I would love to talk about this. So like hit me up, let's have a conversation. But point being, because of that, like I believe that's a thing. I believe that that's a concept, right? Where we can kind of like we feel like we have to force something because we're in the fake it till you make it stage, or we know something and we're working on believing it, like we're working on knowing it deeply. And so you're trusting the process, right? So you're going through the steps, but you don't quite see like you don't really you're like going through the motions and you may not be like fully bought in or convinced or like feeling that this is actually working, right? So it's like you're stepping out in faith, which is important, right? Like I'm not saying this is a bad, I think it's a fact of growth, and I'm not trying to say it's a bad place. Like I think it's a necessary thing and it's just a hard season to navigate and I think that like that's okay. Um And I think that being aware of that could possibly be helpful. But because I believe that like this concept exists, right? To me, it makes sense that I often am trying to like overcompensate with the action. And I believe I'm not the only person out here like this, so I'm sharing it with you, right? So when we're pushing ourselves to take action and we're like, well, I'm not going to feel ready anyway, so let's just go now, like you're pushing, pushing, pushing. Like, I have to take messy action. I have to go, I have to do this thing before I feel ready. I have to accept that, things aren't going to be perfect. I have to understand that, like, the clarity will come through my action. And so you're being brave and you're pushing yourself to take this action and do these things. And you understand, like, I'm not going to feel ready. It's not going to feel good. And I'm just doing it anyway. And I'm working to take the action so that I can have that practice and trusting that, like, the clarity will come and additional, like, skills and refinement will come through the act of practicing, right? So then there's this little piece where it's kind of that inauthentic pushing yourself and encouraging yourself to take action and kind of pushing past what you feel comfortable with and what you feel competent in, right? Because you're stretching yourself and you're pushing. And again, I don't think any of these things are bad. And I think that sometimes because we're already like so far outside of our comfort zone, there can be a disconnect from our intuition. And so then we can be pushing for the sake of pushing. And sometimes it can, for me, it can actually be really easy to like, it's like a thin line, right? And it can be really easy to kind of lose where that is. And then I realize I'm pushing myself based on just the concept of pushing. And I'm not necessarily like on this next step that I'm pushing for. And I like that I think that's why it's so sticky because it's like you're never going to feel ready. You're not right, but there is a certain level of preparedness that is also wise before you start. And I'm just apologizing in advance because I feel like this is like so complex, but I'm gonna stop apologizing because that's gonna take away from the conversation. But so when you're like outside of your comfort zone, and then I think that it can be easy to then kind of be outside of your intuition. And so you're used to like pushing even though like you kind of have to start before you're ready, I think, right? But again, there's like a level of preparedness that you want to have. This is kind of like wise before you're starting something. Okay, so let's use starting a podcast as an example, right? I didn't feel ready to start my podcast, and I truly believe like action follows clarity. I don't think any of my friends with podcasts really felt ready. And so like you kind of embrace that, right? And you're like, all right, well, I'm never gonna feel ready. And there still has to be a level, right? You need a platform for your podcast. You need a way to record it. Like you need something to talk about. Um, so there are things that like you still have to have. And so that's kind of where I'm trying to split hairs here almost and help articulate the difference between like what I'm calling preparedness versus feeling ready. And so but like when you're pushing so hard for the start before you're ready, it can silence the voice of like, wait, I need these things to be prepared. Like that line can get very blurry, in my experience, right? And so in those situations, there can be an urge to push yourself towards a goal or to accomplish a goal before it's actually like a good idea. Ooh, this thought just popped into my head and I'm not sure I want to say it. Um, but I will. We'll throw it out there. It's like when sometimes when people quit their jobs with no plan because like they don't want to work there anymore. And I mean, I have an intention of doing that without a super solid plan. So I think I'm throwing myself under the bus here. So if anybody else feels like they're catching a stray, right there with you. This is not aimed at you. I'm using myself as an example, right? So there's like So you can see that line, okay, and it's like preparedness. Are you going to be homeless or like do you have a plan? Are you living off savings, right? Like I'm not saying everyone needs to have a corporate job all the time, but like did we think this through? And this is why it's so sticky because you can think and think and think and think and think and then it's like, well, how will you ever be prepared to not have a job, right? You'd have to be ready to retire in case something happens, you can't find a new job. No. And like that's the line, right? Like okay, I'm just gonna stop beating the dead horse. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, I'm so sorry. But if you're pushing yourself, like I want to be a full-time entrepreneur, I don't want to be in corporate America. Um, I don't want to be in a job that like snuffs my will to live. Yeah, fully support it, okay? And some people can just like walk out the door and figure it out, right? And then others of us are going to need at least like a foundation, a base plan, right? But if you're the kind of person who needs a base plan, or if you're going to be like, if you quit that job and you're going to be homeless and in debt and not knowing where your next meal is coming from, like maybe do a little bit of preparation before, right? But if you're so in the headspace of like, I gotta push, 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 and like this is, I don't want this job and I need to do what's best for me, and like it's not in alignment and it doesn't light me up, and so I just gotta like quit it and cut everything off immediately without like fully thinking it through, that can be detrimental. And so like I know we're like so far into this, but like that is what I'm talking about today. And when you're if you're like pushing yourself to take the action before you're ready, and then that can cross the line into like you're overriding your intuition, then you can end up in kind of this space where you're like pushing yourself to make these drastic changes before you have like any kind of survival strategy in place. And so, what I want to get into is kind of talking about that and how, in certain situations, taking a step back can be a powerful thing. Because, so for example, like by the time this airs, I will be in Belize, God willing. And you might know that I spent 3 weeks there last year. What you might not know is that I originally planned to go 2 years ago. And making that decision to postpone was really hard because I felt like I was worried that I like wasn't being true to myself because I told myself that I was going to do this and that I was going to be in another country for, several weeks. The goal was originally a month and it ended up being 3 weeks, but it's just honestly just because it worked out better. And so that's another like example of flexibility. But that's a different topic, right? So I want to talk about why actually delaying that a year was a good thing and using that as an example of how taking a step back can be a positive thing and help us go forward in the future. Um, yeah, so let's get into it, right? So I was going to spend, yeah, 3 weeks. I was going to spend a month, whatever, in Mexico or Belize, somewhere outside of the country, somewhere on a beach, right? Because like that's my dream. And I had every intention of doing that 3 years ago. But then I believe. I can't remember if I was still going through my divorce or if my divorce was finalized at that point. I probably could have done the math before, but whatever. But I was also in a ton of debt. And so I was struggling with like, this feels financially irresponsible, but I also told myself I would do this. So, like, and when do you ever have enough money to just like go on vacation for a month, right? So it's like there's always going to be this tension of like, do you really have enough in savings or are there other things you should be spending this money on versus like, I'm already in debt. Should I just like be more in debt, right? And so it can feel like competing priorities, right? Because you you're wanting to do the short-term thing, but then also like you're wanting to do the long-term thing. And my long-term goal is to like spend more time. So at that point, like I want it basically the winter, right? I live in Colorado. don't love the cold, and it gets cold in the winter. We're like dealing with a blizzard right now. I'm recording this in January, trying to work ahead for when I'm in Belize. Um, so I was like, the goal is to spend 3 months somewhere else. And then that is like a lot more complicated, right? Because then there's a whole thing and like work, whatever. Or taking a month off a corporate job is already a lot. Taking 3 weeks is like not going to happen. So there's a lot more factors that go into that. But then realizing that those are actually in alignment, right? Because it can feel competing because you're like, well, the, because I want to spend 3 months somewhere else. And so that baby step, because we also talked about that a couple episodes ago, right? So then the baby step was 1 month, right? Let's start with 1 month and build up. But then at this point in my life, it felt competing because I was like, I want to go spend a month in Belize. I told myself I was going to do that. But now we have like a finances situation and like, is it wise? But also, I don't want to like hold myself back from my dreams. So should I like push myself to and just go do it anyway? And I think what is sticky about this topic also is there's not necessarily a wrong answer. I mean, we know that Dave Ramsey would say there's an obvious wrong answer, don't get yourself into more debt, but like, especially with the way I think a lot of millennials are like discovering things that we were told our whole lives that aren't necessarily true. Like avoiding debt is not always the end all be all, right? I'm not pro bad debt, but I can totally understand how money and debt is not the most important thing in life, right? So I don't think that there is a wrong answer, and that's why I want to encourage you to like if you're dealing with this type of situation, really use your intuition and like figure out what you think about this topic. Don't just like take anything I'm saying and be like, I'm gonna apply this to my life. Okay. I hope you're doing that always anyway, because there's like factors of my life that are amazing and I want to like share and use to inspire people. And there's other parts of my life. I'm ADHD, bro. Like, but my life is a disaster sometimes, right? So like I don't wish my life on anyone else, but there are concepts that and there are things that like I feel like I do pretty well that other people are like, "Oh, I want to do that too." And so those are the things, right? But I don't want anybody copying my life and trying to be like me because 2 stars. I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, I'm gonna stop self-deprecating. Moving on. So when you're in that situation and you're feeling like those priorities are competing, I want to encourage you to take a step back and see like, are they actually in alignment in the bigger scheme of things? And so what I realized is like if I zoom back and I was like, well, yes, baby steps are important and it's important that I broke it down and like got that 1 month, right? Because I was able to do that last year. Did I say I think I got my years wrong. I said 3 years ago instead of I got my years wrong. I was in Belize last year, and it was 2 years ago that I planned on going. I think I said 3 years ago. It's irrelevant, but I'm trying to be correct. Um, so that it was important, right? Because like now that I've spent almost a month outside of the country, even though they speak English and was like a lot easier than maybe a different location, right? That was still an important stepping stone. So I am glad I chose that stepping stone, and now that I've accomplished that stepping stone, I've I am like solidified in the importance of it. But in that moment, I was like zoomed in and I was looking at the stepping stone as if that were the overarching goal. And that is what caused me to think that the priorities were competing, right? Because it's like, am I going on this trip or am I like getting my financial life together? And those felt like two competing things. But when I zoomed out, I was like, oh, the bigger goal with the trip is to be able to spend significant chunks of time outside the country. And in order to do that, I'm going to need financial stability because unless I find a fully remote job, which I don't want to be in corporate, so, right, but unless I find like a fully remote job, the likelihood of working a corporate job while I'm outside the country for 3 months, rough, rough, hard to do, right? So I'm thinking, right, eventually there will have to be no corporate job, and which, yay, right? Like, that's why I'm working so hard on this entrepreneurship thing. But so in the moment, we need financial stability to get to that place. And so zooming out, taking a step back, right, allowed me to realize that postponing this trip was actually in alignment with my bigger goal. And that was really powerful for me because there was like shame in, letting another thing hold me back and feeling like I was giving up on my dreams again because I'm 37 now, right? Like I postponed so many things and I've been living in this like worldview that was like what everybody else told me I was supposed to be doing for so long. And like in my 30s, I'm like realizing there's so much more that there's so much more to life, right? And there's a different path that I want to be on. And so it felt like taking a step back that I was like reverting back and not pursuing this dream that was so important to me that I was so passionate about because I'm like just discovering this path and I'm putting action behind it finally, right? And then to have a full intention of taking that action and then making a decision to be like, no, I'm not going to take that action right now. I'm going to wait even longer. I'm going to postpone it a year, right? And put this on the back burner again. Like that was really hard to do. And that brings up like fears of, do I trust myself enough to follow through next year when I already pushed this off this year? And honestly, I think that's like a whole separate podcast episode. But I think that's part of like once you get to this point where you finally like you're convincing yourself to take action and you're doing the things and you're pushing through the fear, and then to make that decision to be like, actually, I'm not going to take action right now. That is it's actually really hard and scary. And you're like, because then it's so hard to get like motivated and to like get momentum again, right? And you're like, am I going to be able to get started again if I don't push myself to do this right now? And so like that was so hard and like very complex for me. And I think that's probably like a whole separate podcast episode, right? But it was such a powerful choice for me because once I realized that actually not going that year was going to be better for my long-term goals, it helped me come to terms with it so much more. It was still hard. It still hurt my heart. It sucked. Um, but like once I worked through it, I was like, this was the right decision. Like this was a wise decision and this is going to help me get towards my long-term goal. And it helped like having that disappointment helped build my resolve for getting my finances together, right? And so I would use that time to like build a foundation, right? And so when I actually did go to Belize last year, I was in a better situation financially, right? Because I had that preparation and I did the work to like lay the foundation. So by the time I went last year, I had paid down a ton of debt. I've been following a budget, right? And so I budgeted out and then tracked what I spent on that trip, which like a couple years ago, I would not have been bothered and I wouldn't even have like the practice of documenting what I was spending, right? And then it would have felt like a chore because I'm on vacation. It still kind of did. But since I was used to doing that in my everyday life, and the budgeting journey, honestly, could probably be a whole separate podcast episode too, because like it went from feeling like repressive and a chore to actually feeling empowering and like I was taking control of my finances, which I am, and it actually feels really good. So like I was able to go through that mindset shift like in my everyday life before the trip because I've been following a budget, right? And so pushing it back a year gave me a whole other year paying down debt, actually saving for this trip instead of just like putting it on a credit card, right? And then also like the habits that I had built, the routines that I gotten into, the kind of standards that I had set for myself, I'm documenting what I spent. I'm writing stuff down, and I was comparing it to my projected budget and what I was actually spending, and seeing the balance and like, am I going to go over budget for a life-changing experience? Okay, I'm willing to, right? But then I can go into it intentionally instead of just blowing money and then coming back and be like, holy shit, I spent what? Right? So it set me up to be like much more intentional and like in charge of what I was spending on that trip, which again, like is an alignment of my bigger goal of spending more time, like months outside the country because I need financial stability. I do, at least, right? Like I need financial stability for that. And so, like, realizing now in hindsight how that played in has been really powerful. And that's part of why I wanted to share that with you, because I think that that's one of those things that's so hard to see until you are looking back in hindsight and you're like, okay, that was a good decision. And I can see how that actually set me up for success in these ways. And now I'm in a better position to keep going towards my goal. It sucked to take a step back. It felt like, I was losing progress. It felt like I was going back to my old ways of like, we're not traveling because we can't afford it. And it's like, yeah, you've been saying that for 30 years, right? Not literally, but um and then working through that, but then following through. Like I actually did take that trip the next year, right? I didn't keep pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off and bail on myself, right? I did make it happen. And that was super powerful. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm focusing on the financial aspect, of course, and that's just like one little piece, and it's very specific to my journey, but I'm hoping that you're able to see like how this could apply maybe to something like you're struggling with right now, right? And so it pushing it back, right, gave me time to pay down some debt. Again, the behaviors of budgeting, right? Like I grew and strengthened those behaviors so that I documented what I spent and now I have a budget of like what I spent being out of the country for almost a month. And now I can use that as a blueprint for future trips, right? So like I've almost created this tool that wouldn't have necessarily had if I had pushed through and gone earlier, right? And then I had time to save, right? I'm setting money aside instead of just getting myself further into debt, which like that would have detracted from my long-term goal, right? Because then I would have just had more debt to pay off before I could go somewhere for, again, right? Before I could travel again, or let alone go somewhere for even longer, right? So those things, by taking that step back, it actually set me up for more like longevity of success in the future. Because for me, like that financial piece was a huge part of my larger goal. Um, and taking that year and pushing that initial, like that baby step, that milestone back, I was able to prepare more for that bigger goal. So I want to encourage you, like, if you're in a situation where you're like, I actually think it's better if I maybe delay this or push it back or do something else first before I'm like hitting this goal, that can feel, I just want you to feel validated, right? That can feel so shitty, especially if you're like just on this journey where you're listening to yourself and you're wanting to pursue these things and you're doing the work and you're pushing to take action and you're being brave to in all that like scary new beginning, being brave, and then to have to be like, wait, I'm actually going to take a step back and I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna like retreat a little bit. That can bring up so many things. And so I just want to like validate you that it is hard, okay? And it feels messy and it's for me like it was a journey to work through and especially like with the self-trust, right? Trusting myself that I was going to pick this back up again in a year and that I was going to like be financially responsible and build my savings and like be stick to my budget, right? So that I actually was in a better situation in a year, right? Because I could have kept being crazy with my finances and I could have been in more debt in that next year and then really not been able to go, right? So there's a lot of like self-trust that goes into that decision, but it's not necessarily a bad decision when you need to take a step back. It can take a lot of discernment and effort to like figure out like if that's the best decision, if it's wise, right? But with especially me, how much I push action and starting before you feel ready and taking that messy action and doing it scared. I don't want you to feel shame if you decide that it's in your best interest to take a step back while you're working towards a goal. And if you're in that situation, I think it's super hard, right? So I want to like empathize with you. And I want to encourage you that that can, when that's like stewarded well, when it's handled well during that like step back time, however long that period is, it you can use that time truly to set yourself up to go forward further and faster. So don't dismiss it out of hand. It seems hard. It sounds wrong, right? Like, not only am I not making progress, but I'm like taking a step back. But it's like I love the analogy of like pulling back on a bow, right? So that you can like project that arrow further. If you don't pull back, then it's not going to fling forward. So, yeah. Don't use this as an excuse to like not go for the things that are in alignment with your purpose. It's a very specific situation. But yeah, if you are in that situation, just know I know that it's hard and I'm right there with you. And if there's anything you want to like talk through, or you have like questions, or you just need somebody to like listen, I am here. I am at the Fierce Framework on social media platforms. I'll include a link to join my newsletter below in the description. And you can always just leave a comment on the podcast platform or on YouTube. And I will see you so soon. Until then, keep becoming fierce.